Welcome to the 2022 Christian Science Nursing Arts Graduation. I'm Geneva Toller, CEO of the Benevolent Association, and we want you to know how very grateful we are for each and every one of you all that are here today. We're going to begin with singing hymn number 207. And the words of this hymn are by Mary Baker Eddy. O gentle presence, peace and joy and power, O life divine that owns each waiting hour, thou love that guards the nestling's faltering flight, keep thou my child on upward wing tonight. Love is our refuge. Only with mine eye can I behold the snare, the pit, the fall. His habitation high is here and nigh. His arm encircles me, and mine and all. Oh, make me glad for every scalding tear, for hope deferred, ingratitude, disdain. Wait and love more for every hate, and fear no ill, since God is good and loss is gain. Beneath the shadow of his mighty wing, in that sweet secret of the narrow way, seeking and finding, with the angels sing, Lo, I am with you alway, watch and pray. No snare, no fowler, pestilence or pain, no night drops down upon the troubled breast. When heaven's after smile earth's teardrops gain, and mother finds her home and heavenly rest. Hymn number 207. We'll now have readings from Robin Liebenrud, Assistant Director of Christian Science Nurses Training.
I'll read from the Bible, Genesis. And Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night because the sun was set. And he took of the stones of that place and put them for his pillows, and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. Behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land. For I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. Psalms. The mercy of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting upon them that fear him, and his righteousness unto children's children, to such as keep his covenant, and to those that remember his commandments to do them. Bless the Lord, ye his angels, that excel in strength, that do his commandments, hearkening unto the voice of his word. Philippians. My beloved, as ye have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, that ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God, without rebuke in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom ye shine as lights in the world. From Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy. My angels are exalted thoughts, appearing at the door of some sepulchre in which human belief has buried its fondest earthly hopes. With white fingers they point upward to a new and glorified trust, to higher ideals of life and its joys. By giving earnest heed to these spiritual guides, they tarry with us, and we entertain angels unawares. As the children of Israel were guided triumphantly through the Red Sea, the dark, ebbing, and flowing tides of human fear, as they were led through the wilderness, walking wearily through the great desert of human hopes, and anticipating the promised joy, so shall the spiritual idea guide all right desires in their passage from sense to soul, from a material sense of existence to the spiritual, up to the glory prepared for them who love God. And from Miscellaneous Writings and Retrospection and Introspection by Mrs. Eddy. Think of this inheritance. Heaven right here, where angels are as men, clothed more lightly, and men as angels who, burdened for an hour, spring into liberty, and the good they would do, that they do, and the evil they would not do, that they do not. Of this also rest assured, that books and teaching are but a ladder let down from heaven, from the heaven of truth and love, upon which angelic thoughts ascend and descend, bearing on their pinions of light the Christ Spirit. As Christian scientists, you have dared the perilous defense of truth and have succeeded. You have learned how fleeting it is which men call great, and how permanent that which God calls good. You have proven that the greatest piety is scarcely sufficient to demonstrate what you have adopted and taught, that your work, well done, would dignify angels. Among the manifold soft chimes that will fill the haunted chambers of memory, this is the sweetest. Thou hast been faithful.
Thank Thank you, Robin. How wonderful to be able to meet once again together and in person in the chapel for graduation. This graduation honors the class of 2022. Our 8 graduates represent 5 countries from around the world: Australia, Kenya, the Philippines, South Africa, and the United States. We're so grateful for the organizations that are supporting these graduates with classroom training and side-by-side mentoring. And we have executive directors and directors of Christian Science nurses training from all of these facilities: Ardenwood in California, The Leaves in Texas, Peacehaven in Missouri, and Chestnut Hill Benevolent Association. We're here today to say thank you to our 8 graduates, but also to all other Christian Science nurses, as well as all those supporting this healing work throughout the world. We want to especially express our gratitude to the Christian Science Board of Directors for their care for this holy ministry and their care for the Church Manual Bylaw, Christian Science Nurse, and the Christian Science Journal listing process. In March of this year, the Christian Science Board of Directors announced that the completion of all 4 levels of training were requisite before listing in the Christian Science Journal. We're so grateful for this decision, and these 4 levels of training are included in the Christian Science Nursing Arts program that these 8 graduates have completed. And a last note of gratitude. Gratitude for uninterrupted Christian Science Nursing Arts training classes during these last several years. Gratitude for extensive repairs to all of our campus buildings during this same period of time, and for the donors that supported this. These repairs included a new state-of-the-art heating and air conditioning system for this chapel. Now, those of you all that have attended other events here, you'll notice that the huge vents that used to obscure the windows in the balcony are no longer there. And it allows all of that light to shine forth. And also, you'll notice how much quieter this system is for those of you all who have attended before. And finally, just once again, great gratitude that we're able to be together in person for this graduation. We'll now hear from Carol Worley, Director of Christian Science Nurses Training, with remarks for the graduates.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us in recognizing the Christian Science nurses in this graduating class. And for you, the graduates. I know I speak for all of us as your instructors and mentors that it's been a joy to work with you, both in the classroom and side by side in your work as Christian Science nurses. It was evident when you first began the Christian Science Nursing Arts training that you came prepared for this holy work. The art of Christian Science nursing was readily seen in your expression and lives. And you've brought such excellence to further cultivating these qualities into a sound practice of Christian Science nursing, working closely with the Bible and Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, and applying these truths specifically to what is required for representing yourself as a Christian Science nurse, letting these truths illumine your way. The need for Christian Science nurses is well known, but what may not be so well understood is that it's about working in the fields, ready for harvest. Centuries ago, Christ Jesus said, "The harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few." He taught and brought forth the fruits that prove the absolute scientific fact to be the present fact, that man is spiritual and perfect, and that he never has had any other state of being. He revealed scientific truths about God and man and the universe, breaking through firmly held materialistic doctrines and beliefs, awakening human thought to the present reality, the kingdom of heaven within and here, and that the material sense of things is just a delusion. And today, the harvest is great. The eternal truth is unchanged, as has been revealed with Mary Baker Eddy's discovery of Christian Science. We have the promised Comforter abiding with us. And not only do we have the divine laws of life, truth, and love with which to demonstrate these truths, giving proof of man's freedom from sin, sickness, and death, but in answering God's call to her to proclaim his gospel to this age, Mrs. Eddy tells us that there came also the charge to plant and water his vineyard. She established her church and its offices, posts, and activities, and giving us the church manual, placing her church and all that she founded under God's government. Everything in place for the joyous and needed work in his vineyard of bringing forth the fruits of Christian Science for all mankind. As Paul said, speaking of the Christ, and using the analogy of the body and its members to illustrate the individual functions, offices, posts of the church, there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are diversities of operations, but the same God, which worketh all in all. Thank you for the many things you're doing and will do in working in this vineyard as devoted members of the Mother Church, filling individual posts in your branch church, and in healing and the daily demonstration of Christian Science. There's certainly sufficient occupation for all members of the Mother Church, some unique to some members, and some that all are to be engaged in, but each activity and post having a distinct purpose, diversities of operations, members, and members in particular, as Paul said to the Corinthians, each in his place, fulfilling designated posts and offices. Each post and activity has requirements that fit one to be able to bring forth fruits for the needed work in the fields ready for harvest. We're recognizing you today specifically for giving devoted attention and care to what Mrs. Eddy defines about members in particular for the work that you're doing in Christian Science nursing. As you've been working under the shepherding care and guidance of this church manual bylaw, Christian Science Nurse, you've seen that you can't meet one requirement without the other in this work, but it is to do all together, bringing out the art of Christian Science nursing, understanding the wholeness of these requirements revealed by divine mind and as brought together in our church manual. Of course, you're well acquainted with these requirements. Those of you who aren't, it's printed on the back of your program tonight. It's the way to work in the vineyard, having the devotion to the cause, the spiritual understanding and practice, the wisdom, practicality, and love to bring forth fruits in this specific work. Members in particular, prepared, as you are, to work in the harvest fields where there's a need to separate the tares from the wheat, able to discern between the false and the true as you come to bear witness to the healing efficacy of Christian Science and minister to those in need based on the truth that you know so well. You are doers of the word and not hearers only, not just talking about the truths that you know and love, but the word made practical, having the grace, the art to bring this out by your deeds, bringing forth evidence of the dear Father's loving kindness, bearing witness to the Christ truth that supplies all needs at all times and in all circumstances, divinity embracing humanity. We've seen by your ministry that you understand that the work of Christian Science nursing is not about waiting for the time of harvest and giving loving care in the interim, but workers ready, spiritually prepared to demonstrate by your fruits that God is love and all, and man is the loved idea of God. Yes, the tares may appear to be there, suggesting something contrary to this loving law, but that's part of the work and why you're so needed, to distinguish between the real and the unreal, discerning with spiritual sense to separate out as you bring forth the fruit of Spirit. That needed evidence, proof that God is Spirit, ever present, and the only presence and power. Paul speaks of the fruit of Spirit as qualities, these qualities that you live. He says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. We see in these qualities the qualities Mrs. Eddy specifies in describing what a nurse should be. It's this fruit of the Spirit, these qualities that give evidence of God's love and presence, that you've so readily brought forth, and with such wonderful individual expression. These are not personality traits, but rather our divine nature, hallowing God's name as his own image and likeness, that the nature of life, truth, and love be reflected by you and in your work, qualities that evoke healing from God's loving outstretched arm. And while this fruit of Spirit is essential and natural to bring forth in Christian Science nursing, it's also a wonderful protection to you. As Paul says, against such there is no law, because the work, your work, is all in the realm of Spirit, coincident with the divine, and never mingling or uniting with the unreal. Qualities of divine mind expressed, all within the sphere of science, surrounding you and all, where no element of error enters in. Receptive to truth and love, never taken in or touched by false belief. I was speaking recently with fellow instructors about some of the lovely healings that have taken place with those that you've so lovingly supported with Christian Science nursing. We were recognizing how natural it's been to you as the healing takes place, because the evidence of man's perfection, innocence, and dominion seen in these healings is right in accord with how you've been seeing your fellow man as you ministered to him in time of need. Thank you for keeping the vision of Christian Science to behold the kingdom of heaven here, and that the fields are already white with harvest, never losing sight of the divine principle, love, as you work, and of man as God's loved image and likeness. As we congratulate you today for completing the Christian Science Nursing Arts training for a proven and prepared practice of Christian Science nursing, we're reminded of these words from our leader. The field waves its white ensign. The reapers are strong. The rich sheaves are ripe. The storehouse is ready. Pray ye, therefore, the God of harvest, to send forth more laborers of the excellent sort, and garner the supplies for a world. Thank you for a work well done. If you joined us yesterday, you were given a brief introduction to each member of this class, and 4 of them shared how they were led to answer this call, giving us a glimpse into the quality of these Christian Science nurses, their metaphysical maturity, devotion to God, their childlikeness and humility, and deep compassion for their fellow man. It's my privilege now to introduce our class speaker. You'll get to know her through her own remarks. But I'll tell you that it was clear from our first communication with Lynn that she was well prepared to enter into this work of Christian Science nursing and represent this manual bylaw. She came with a seasoned practice of Christian Science and filled with love, joy, and unselfishness that's so innate to the practice of Christian Science nursing. Yesterday, you heard that she loves everything and everyone, but has a particular affection for children and dogs. There are a number of questions that we often receive from Christian Science nurses when they first arrive in Boston and come to the BA for the training. One of the first questions that Lynn asked Robin and I as we were driving her from the airport to the BA was, "Are there dogs at the BA to hug?" Let's hear from Lynn now.
Thank you, Carol. Good afternoon. I cannot tell you what a joy it was to share the Christian Science Nursing Arts 4 class with these fellow Christian Science nurses. And I cannot tell you how special this graduation is for me, but I will try. As you heard last evening, our stories are all very unique, but in each instance it is so obvious that God's hand was there to shepherd us. After school, I went to university to do a Bachelor of Arts degree. I never finished it. But now, here at last, along with these 7 friends, I am graduating from the most worthy arts program of all the arts programs, the Christian Science Nursing Arts program. Here is part of my story. Like many of my classmates, I attended Sunday school along with my 2 sisters. My mother was introduced to Christian Science by her aunt, who was a Christian Science nurse. From an early age, all that I ever wanted to do was act, to be a performer. As a child, I took part in every school and local theatre production and later went on to train and act professionally. I loved the arts. I loved the sheer scale of beauty, the unbridled joy of color, the grandeur of expression, and the fullness of participation. Along the way, I learned the many life lessons that the discipline of the arts provides. I learned that doing the steps, however skillfully, does not make a dance. That technique without the love makes a performance wooden or routine. I loved the discipline it took to delve deep into a script and to wrestle with the text in order to fully understand the director's vision, how to play off other actors and the audience, to be receptive, to care, and to share. But I also saw the flip side of this world of theatre art form, the competitiveness, the ego, sensuality, self-doubt, and fear. There was lots to pray about in order to keep sight of man's identity and God as creator. My interest in theatre then extended to theatre in education. Over the years, as a drama educator, I came to see and to love that this art form was not just a social skill, but a life skill for children. One day, while discussing the merits of science versus art, especially in the school system, my brother-in-law, an engineer, quoted this statement from Miscellaneous Writings by Mary Baker Eddy: "Art must not prevail over science." I really needed to chew on this. I needed to get a deeper understanding of what Mrs. Eddy was meaning. 2 things became clear. The first was a better understanding of both art and science with a capital S. I knew that science was fixed, an unchanging universal law, God's eternal principle. And I knew that art, when it worked, could change a perspective, break a prejudice. It could transcend language and cultural barriers. It could loosen and uplift a child or an entire audience to a better place. And I began to see that this Christly art was, like the prodigal, always bringing us back to science, back home to the blessing and freedom of who we truly are, because God is, and we are His. And that is what makes art so instantly universal. But I also saw the need to honor the balance of this relationship between science and art, where art must not prevail over science. Because when we seek the art of something more than the principle of it, when we crave the euphoria of art for well-being rather than the rules of principle, we create a Babel tower of confusion where art becomes opinionated and perverse, when truth then becomes personal, and inspiration is reduced to a fuzzy emotion. But the Christly art always leads us to that pinnacle of home that is the beauty of soul. In time, it became clear that I should leave full-time teaching to be a companion to and care for my mother. I was also able to care for friends who needed assistance. There were some dark times, but there's also such sweetness in finding just the right meal, the perfect placement of a pillow, and the inspired words of encouragement. I thought I had left the arts. Little did I realize that this was my introduction to Comforts Art 101. After caring for my mum, I felt I should return to work. But now I wanted to work for something major. I wanted to be part of an organization that would really take on the world. No actor's fourth wall, no veiled innuendos, no metaphor, no politics. The idea of Christian Science nursing had been suggested to me over the years, but I never took it seriously. I had even been shown a nurse's manual with pictures in it of what I would do as a Christian Science nurse. It did not seem appealing. But the idea was becoming stronger, and it is not easy to kick against the pricks. In prayerful search, I was very much directed to the BA website. Well, you can imagine my surprise when I read that it offered the Christian Science Nursing Arts program. I really had little idea of what it would entail, but if there was any cause that challenged all that is wrong in this world and stood firmly on the rock of all that is true and good, then this was most definitely it. The application form was the most in-depth and soul-searching form that I have ever filled in, and I loved it. It was a big move to come to the States and the BA. On the first day of class, I remember sitting in an unfamiliar room with people I didn't know in a strange country and hearing the opening address from our director of Christian Science Nurses Training. And I just wanted to throw back my head and whoop with joy. I knew I was home. Here was truth being voiced without a foothold of error. I realized there was nothing that would need to be sieved through the teeth here. Nothing veiled, no wobbly science. This program was designed to bring every aspect of the manual bylaw into sharp focus and practical applied demonstration. At every point, we were guided back to line upon line, back to bringing our practice of Christian Science nursing in line with the Christian Science that Mrs. Eddy taught and expected us to follow. This is the art of this program. I'm so incredibly grateful for that. And for those beloved, precious ones who worked so diligently, and with such humility and dedication to bring us this program, for the beauty of its sheer honesty and simplicity and commitment to truth, no pictures, no personal sense, no deviation. I cannot say thank you enough to each mentor and instructor who, in their own unique way, has cushioned, prodded, and or guided me. I'm deeply grateful, too, for every one of our Christian Science nurse brother bird co-workers, patients, practitioners, and management, who all on the same branch bend in our allegiance to God. And so, as participants of the Christian Science Nursing Arts program, we are given the tools for our practice. And as Christian Science nurses, we need to develop and demonstrate our practice. In all honesty, I have to say this has not been easy. It has been a vertical learning curve for me. There have been continuous challenges of personal sense, all the rubbish that mortal mind throws up when we take a stand for truth. But we are standing, and it is an honest, unveiled stand. We speak the truth directly and imperatively. Science is exact. There is no fuzziness there. We are mastering the art that lifts and loosens by turning all thought to God, divine principle. Like Victor Hugo says, and the cast of Les Mis sings so jubilantly, to love another person is to see the face of God. To truly love is to bear witness only to God's creation. As the Canaanite woman who asked for a crumb of truth from Christ's table, every little act of nursing tenderness or skill is an art that is not separate from science, because principle is not fragmentary, and God is all in all. Working from this perspective, care cannot be routine. A care idea cannot be an arbitrary choice. Demonstration cannot be technique. Art can never be separate from science. Mrs. Eddy said, the truest art of Christian Science is to be a Christian scientist. And it takes more than a Raphael to delineate this art. I think perhaps we have all come to realize that the graduating process, like the refining process, is ongoing. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of my classmates when I say a huge thank you to family and friends and practitioners for their unstinting support. Personally, I should like to say baie dankie to all those of you who put up with my South Africanisms and my 10,000 questions. Thank you to everyone at the BA and the friends of the BA for providing us with this opportunity and with such a caring, loving place. Finally, I would like to wish the graduation class of 2022 all the very best. As Mrs. Eddy says, let us rejoice that we are subject to the divine powers that be. Let us march onward, Christian Science nursing soldiers, keeping that standard aloft. Let us fight the good fight with all our might, because Christ is our strength and Christ our right. Thank you.
We're going to sing again. This time, hymn number 150. In mercy, in goodness, how great is our King. Our tribute, thanksgiving, with glad hearts we bring. Thou art the renewer, the ancient of days, who givest for mourning the garment of praise. Hymn 150. So, would the graduating class please move to the left of the stage and come forward as we call your name and the facility that supported you in your training. And I want to thank Jonathan Way, who is one of our BA trustees, for announcing the names. Thank you so much.
Jenner Valiant Duran, Chestnut Hill Benevolent Association. Lynn Ellis, Chestnut Hill Benevolent Association. Caroline Gathogo, Ardenwood. Stacy Green, Peacehaven. Joshua J. Kenworthy, Chestnut Hill Benevolent Association. Harriet Oma Ardenwood. Michelle S. Ponder, Chestnut Hill Benevolent Association. Lauren A. Weingarten, The Leaves.
I present the class of 2022 Christian Science Nursing Arts.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Hutchins, one of the trustees of the Chestnut Hill Benevolent Association. And before introducing our keynote speaker, I would just like to say to our graduates that you are truly the pride of our movement today. And we thank you for all of your work and dedication and devotion. Our keynote speaker is Joan Wilson Andrews. Joan is a lifelong Christian Scientist. She is a journal-listed practitioner and an active member of First Church of Christ Scientist, Cambridge, Massachusetts, where she has served as first reader, executive board chair, and Sunday school teacher, probably among many other things. Joan worked at the Mother Church for 23 years, the largest portion of that time in the Committee on Publication office, where she was a writer in the editorial division and later served as assistant manager of the office. And I must say, in view of a couple of our friends who are here today, that Joan worked with Tom Johnson and Stephen Gottschalk and Skip Finney and Robert Peel, so I think every day must have been like a graduate seminar in Christian Science. Joan's home is in Wellesley, Massachusetts, where she lives with her husband, David. Her earliest years were in California, where she was born, and later graduated from Pomona College, but we are glad she decided to make Boston her home. The title of Joan's talk is, What Does a New Time Feel Like? Joan Andrews.
Thank you, Jeff. And greetings, everyone, friends, acquaintances, and all fellow celebrators. And to our 8 graduating nurses, thank you for giving us the reason for this worthy celebration. I think thank you seems like a small thing to say for all your hours of demanding work, continuous learning, and selfless giving that brought each of you to this day. Someone who is a Christian Science nurse has entered a special category of service in our world. The world may not know enough about it yet, but who knows? That may change. Christian Scientists do know about it, however, and they are grateful for nurses. I'll say more about how valued your work is later in my talk. The title of today's talk is, What Does a New Time Feel Like? If someone told you that this is a new time, You might want to know where that estimate is coming from. You'd rightly want them to explain what they think a new time is and what it feels like. Well, here are some thoughts. A new time includes hope and expectancy. It includes readiness and a willingness to learn new things and take on new assignments. A new time often follows hard-won victories and includes new possibilities that have appeared with the breaking down of old limitations. And that happens when trials have been faced and overcome. A new time is not something that the world gives. A new time is given by God. It's a time of greater realization and demonstration of God's power to leaven and govern human experience. In the past 2.5 years, we've all had to learn new lessons. We've had to gain and regain our clarity, and we've had to lean on our understanding of God to a degree that may have surprised us. But what's come out of this repeated turning to God is a different time. Even if the human mind has argued that we were coming apart at the seams, that very argument has turned us again and again to the availability of discernment, strength, and a degree of trust in God that we haven't experienced before. When we realize that this new time is not something we're being punished with or are just imagining, we begin to see that God, infinite mind, we begin to see what God, infinite mind, is showing us. It's quite different from the world's arguments that modern medical science removes the need for Christian Science, and that we must therefore be realistic and accept the fact that material sense is the authoritative bottom line. Science and health with Key to the Scriptures broke through those assertions 1.5 centuries ago. Those who have been working and taking a stand against the worldly belief that these times are too much for Christian Science have seen possibility where impossibility once argued. Breakthroughs that bless everyone, and the evidence of God's pure goodness displacing fears of his absence. This coming alive of God's power is available to all who accept it, no matter where you come from or where you live. Progress in the thought of Christian scientists affects everyone. Mary Baker Eddy writes in Science and Health, "Beholding the infinite tasks of truth, we pause, wait on God, then we push onward." We know a fair amount about the infinite tasks ahead of us, but what makes this time different is a new willingness to leave the status quo and to push forward. And to do this because we have first paused and waited on God and are finding that it is He who is impelling us forward. Standing firm in the face of error doesn't always feel like instant victory, but it's our repeated turning to God and waiting on God that has carved out a new time. In many instances, we may have heard the human mind arguing, "You're in over your head." But that has awakened us to the actual availability and power of spiritual strength we may have only partially sensed before. Seeing this new time requires us to know on which side we're standing. In other words, to choose where we stand. The Apostle Paul writes, "We have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of God, that we might know the things that are freely given to us of God, The spirit of the world needs our help, needs us to value what we have received, to cherish it, to lean on it, and demonstrate it. The pandemic has forced us to learn a lot more about what our true freedom and thought and true freedom of thought and action are. This freedom to accept God's infinitude is actually sturdy. It's a place in which we can safely abide. And as we do that, we're seeing the clear meaning of another spiritual assurance from Paul. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Mary Baker Eddy has some wise words for us in her book, Miscellaneous Writings. She says, floating with the popular current of mortal thought, without questioning the reliability of its conclusions, we do what others do, believe what others believe, and say what others say. Then she adds at the end, common consent is contagious, and it makes disease catching. Well, as Christian Scientists, recent months have taught us more about questioning common consent. In our times, we're learning more about the need to correct what we're accepting as we go along. When we're thinking clearly and we're wide awake, we've learned that we have the right of refusal when it comes to accepting the thoughts and beliefs that are sweeping through our world. Early on in the pandemic, when all of us were being warned daily and hourly of the need to wash our hands, I was caught off guard by anxiety one day, and I realized I needed a clearer, much more spiritual view of this. Angel thoughts can be surprisingly near when we need them, and the one that came to me almost instantly was in 3 words: clean every whit. I knew it was in the New Testament, but I couldn't remember where, so I looked it up and found it in John 13. In that chapter, we're told that immediately after the Passover supper, Jesus stood up, wrapped a towel around himself, and took a basin of water and began to wash his disciples' feet. When he came to Peter, that familiar disciple, feeling his own unworthiness, said, "Thou shalt never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me." Well, at that point, Simon Peter said, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." But Jesus said to him, "He that is washed needeth not save to wash his feet, but is clean every whit." As I took this in, it felt like the sun was breaking through a dark bank of clouds. It was saying to me that if we're allowing the Christ to wash our feet, something out of the ordinary is going on. It not only takes humility to wash someone's feet, it takes humility to have your feet washed. And this humility is just as needed in the figurative sense of foot washing as it is in the literal sense. Lifting our fears, our weaknesses, our stubborn will up into the light to be washed by the purifying power of Christ takes a childlike trust in good, and it takes knowing we're in this kind of foot washing for the long haul. It's not something that happens just once and then we're done. What I glimpsed that day is that this ongoing mental and spiritual purifying, symbolized by foot washing, is not only what's required of us, it's literally what keeps us safe. It's what keeps us clean every whit. I've gone back to this spiritual reassurance many times. Letting the Christ wash our feet, our understanding, not just once in a while, but on an ongoing basis as we go through our days, makes an enormous difference. But if this is a new time of greater strength, gleaned from lessons learned, what about the taunts that say Christian Science is dying? Those taunts began, by the way, when Christian Science first appeared. Christian Science can't die, but it also can't disappear, even temporarily, if we are practicing it. If we're really practicing it and being changed in the process, we'll find it can do whatever is needed and much, much more. And we'll see clearly how Christian Science has already been leavening world thought in spite of the skepticism of the human mind. Christian Science didn't come in the first place through human initiative or through someone's personal knowledge. It came through self-sacrifice and prayer and listening, through revelation and demonstration of what was being unfolded. Mary Baker Eddy refers to this science as the revelation of Emmanuel, God with us, the sovereign ever-presence, delivering the children of men from every ill that flesh is heir to. We're in a time when we can't be faint-hearted warriors. Now is the time to let go of a lot of the things that slow us down and that we've been meaning to let go of. In miscellaneous writings, Mrs. Eddy has included an instructive narrative called An Allegory. Most of you have undoubtedly read it at some point. It feels like its purpose is to alert us to the mesmeric pull of worldly, earthbound thinking and living, to wake us up and put us back on track again. It feels fresh. The allegory tells of the Christ figure coming down from a city set upon a hill to find a few laborers in a valley watching for his coming. Before leading those faithful watchers and workers up the mountain, the Christ figure goes through the city from house to house, hoping to rouse more people. He finds them dazed, sleeping at noonday, some bedazzled by luxury and unaware of any spiritual quest. None seem particularly happy, and eventually their dwellings can't avoid a spreading fire. This is an allegory, remember. So the Christ figure returns to those who are waiting for him in the valley and starts with them on the journey up the mountain. A few of them have brought along some heavy baggage that they refuse to put down, and they soon fall off the trail. To those who are willing above all else to go up the mountain, the stranger says, "Make thine own way, and if thou strayest, listen for the mountain horn, and it will call thee back to the path that goeth upward." Well, it seems to me at this time that the clear tone of the mountain horn is being heard, and we're paying attention to it. The allegory includes these words: "Whatever obstructs the way, causing to stumble, fall, or faint those mortals who are striving to enter the path, divine love will remove and uplift the fallen and strengthen the weak." So this is a time to commit ourselves, not just to be observers. We needn't fear a new time. Consider the fact that we've earned it and are ready for it. Today we're in good company with the spiritual seekers of a century and a quarter ago who, when in serious need, came face to face with a very new time. If you'd like to remind yourself of how those individuals greeted the initial arrival of Christian Science on the human scene, Read again the 83 testimonies in the final chapter of Science and Health. That chapter, called Fruitage, gives a good picture of how those turn-of-the-century seekers found they were living in a time of almost unheard of newness of life. Each testifier was healed solely through reading Science and Health and finding his or her thought opened in a whole new way to the presence and power of God to heal and save, to healings that hadn't been seen since the time of Christ Jesus and the earliest Christian church. The discovery of Christian Science was so different from what human thought had been trained to believe that it startled and challenged. Actually, it seriously upset primary established views in science, theology, and medicine. But irrespective of that challenge, honest seekers for truth were being drawn to these teachings, many out of desperation when medicine had failed to heal them. They were reading Science and Health and having healings of every type of disease, accident, and despair. It wasn't just a minor shift in thought that was taking place. It was evidence of the Christ idea dawning again in human consciousness. I recently reread Fruitage and felt awed by the gratitude and spiritual hunger and thirst with which the testifiers greeted Christian Science and their own demonstration of its truths. One wrote, "There was no joy ever greater than mine for this Christ cure, for I was very weary and heavy laden." Another, who was healed of several incurable diseases by reading the little book, said, "I read it not thinking it would heal me, but like a drowning man, I grasped at it." After praying for answers to a life-threatening situation, a woman wrote, "Suddenly, like a wonderful burst of sunlight after a storm, came clearly this thought: be still and know that I am God. All self-conceit, egotism, selfishness, everything that constitutes the mortal I, sank abashed out of sight." She wrote, "From that hour I have had an intelligent consciousness of the ever-presence of an infinite God who is only good." As we read these testimonies, instead of them feeling like something out of the past, they give us a new way to think about healing in our time. We're reminded there is more good waiting for us than we'd realized. The testifiers included sentences that feel like wake-up calls. One wrote, "As time went on, I learned the nothingness of discouragement." Another said, "I have proved many times that fear can neither help nor hinder in our demonstration of truth." Reading Fruitage makes today's often challenging mental climate seem more dreamlike and transitory. To take in the testifiers' descriptions of how reading Science and Health opened a door to a new life for them is transforming. It made me more grateful for everyone who is reading and studying the Christian Science textbook at this time. So you might like to take a fresh look at that chapter. Now, flash forward 50 years from the time of the Fruitage chapter to the mid-20th century. I'd like to try to describe what a yearning for a new time might have felt like for a young U.S. Marine in the Korean War in 1950. It was often called the Forgotten War. It was a difficult time for all who were engaged in that war. The United States and the United Nations had come to the aid of South Korea after it was invaded by North Korea. The North Koreans were supported by 3 million Chinese military and civilian personnel. The war lasted 3 years, and estimates of the casualties suffered by both sides totaled about 3 million people. I remember my attention being drawn to this particular young U.S. Marine sometime after the war when I first saw the Life magazine Korean War photos taken by the well-known photographer David Douglas Duncan. The particular photo I'm referring to is a close-up of a young Marine silently looking upward to the sky, holding a can of food. It's the middle of winter in the Korean mountains, where those who'd been there said it could reach 40 degrees below zero. He's wearing his helmet with the hood of his jacket pulled over it, and a large, heavy cloth around his neck and shoulders is knotted on his chest. The photo is quite unforgettable. It was one of many photos of a battalion of weary Marines who were retreating from a battle at the Chosin Reservoir, a battle they had just lost to the opposing side, who greatly outnumbered the Allies. Though the Allies lost that particular battle, they put up a strong resistance. The black and white photos are very realistic. They're not glamorous. They depict the human toll of war, as well as the courage that being on the battlefield calls for. Now you'll think I'm changing the subject, but bear with me, this story has several facets. Some 20 years after that photo was published in Life magazine, a remarkable testimony of healing appeared in the Christian Science Journal of November 1970. There was nothing in the testimony to connect it to the Korean War. The testifier told of an on-the-job injury while doing construction work in Northern California. While working, he'd been balanced on a 6-foot-high fence. When he finished, he jumped backward, forgetting that one foot had been wedged between two braces of the fence. He fell to the pavement, badly injured and in a great deal of pain. As a Christian Scientist, he said, I turned my thought to God and prayed to know the truth of my relationship with Him. His employer insisted on driving him to a hospital where x-rays could be taken. The doctor said the breaks in his ankle were so bad he would need a bone specialist, and gave him the names of several in his hometown. When he arrived home, he and his wife called a Christian Science practitioner. The pain and swelling stopped within the next hour. The testifier realized that Science and Health makes a provision that bones can be set, so he reluctantly thought that if he did that, a walking cast might allow him to return to work. So he made an appointment with a bone specialist. Well, the specialist described the break as one of the worst he'd ever seen and said that only surgery could do anything, and even that would give him less than a 10% chance of ever using his ankle normally again. The patient had tremendous trust in God and told the doctor he was a Christian Scientist and wished to be released to work this out in Christian Science. The doctor was greatly alarmed and said that by doing nothing, quote unquote, he might never walk again. The testifier and his wife signed papers releasing the doctor, the hospital, and the insurance company from any responsibility. He spent the next 3 days as a guest at the Christian Science Benevolent Association on the Pacific Coast. That is what it was called then, before it was Ardenwood. He used this time to study and ponder the spiritual truths in Science and Health with key to the Scriptures. He was also tremendously inspired by talking to the assistant superintendent of nurses, who told him of many healings of broken bones through mental surgery alone. He said this was when he lost his fear of not having a complete healing. He drew great comfort from a verse from Isaiah, "Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. During the following week at home, he continued to study, seeing himself as not material, but spiritual, and made in the image and likeness of God. He also had many inspiring visits from the faithful practitioner. He said, "One night I was awakened by a loud snap in my ankle. I knew the bones were adjusting, and my thought was clear that in God's spiritual idea, nothing can be out of place." 13 days after the accident, he got up and walked around the room, and he and his family glorified God. His 12-year-old son said, "No one would ever be able to tell him that Christian Science doesn't heal." He returned to work and was again able to be on his feet all day, climb ladders, work on scaffolds, and carry heavy loads. He said, "Words can never express my gratitude for Christian Science." 3 or 4 years ago, I learned of the link between these two scenes that I've just shared, the one of the young Marine in the middle of winter in Korea, and the other of the man who had the beautiful healing of the shattered ankle. Although the Marine in the Life magazine photo was unidentified, the family of the young man didn't find it difficult to recognize their son. His name was Richard Dunlap, and he'd been raised as a Christian Scientist. After a long year on the battlefield in Korea, he was able to come home. He married and began to raise a family. The later beautiful healing of the shattered ankle after the fall from the fence was his healing. His granddaughter gave me a little more information, which helps the story come to life even more. Some of you may know her. She is Amanda Kaiser, who has been working in recent years for the Committee on Publication Office in Boston. She currently lives in California with her husband and little boy, and she's still working remotely for that office. She tells me that sometime after his healing, her grandfather was led to assist the Pacific Coast BA with some grounds and landscaping work. She said he would talk with people who came and went about Christian Science. As time progressed, he started to receive requests for prayer himself. Step by step, this led him into the full-time practice. He was listed in the Christian Science Journal as a Christian Science practitioner for 32 years until his passing in 2005. She described the support her grandfather gave her family as she was growing up and said it was a significant factor in helping them see and experience the effectiveness of Christian Science. In regard to his earlier time in Korea, he told family members that he had never hated the enemy, and he always believed that there must be better, higher ways of solving problems than through war. If you'd like to see that iconic photo that I've described, I'm sure some of you have seen it, all you have to do is Google Life magazine Korean War photos, and it will help if you put by David Douglas Duncan. Scroll until you see the one titled Dazed Hooded Marine. Now, Amanda is quite sure that that caption wasn't in the original magazine, but it is the way the photo is identified in the online photo essay. To me, his quiet upward gaze is much more thoughtful than dazed, and is what sets that photo apart. Years ago, the photographer told the Dunlap family that many families saw their son in the yearning depicted in that photo of an unidentified Marine. In fact, the photo was never officially linked to any name, though his family recognized it as a photo of him, and apparently Richard himself did too when he saw it later. In an article in Time magazine in 2010, was this statement about David Douglas Duncan, the photographer. It said, 60 years later, he can still remember approaching one soldier on the verge of freezing who stood clutching a can of food. I asked him, if I were God, what would you want for Christmas? He just looked up into the sky and said, give me tomorrow. Well, what did this story have to do with a new time? Well, an entirely new time for this man grew out of his faithfulness. As the weary Marine, he obviously yearned for an end to the war, for a time without danger and brutality and killing. His background as a Christian Scientist must have given him hope in the reality of spiritual brotherhood. After his fall from the fence, as a construction worker, steadfast prayer on the part of the practitioner and himself brought his healing from an injury that threatened his ability to walk. And he found his freedom through his love for and understanding of Spirit, God, and of man's true spiritual nature as the reflection of God. In both instances of finding his dominion over the world's belief of war, accident, and victimization, he truly found a new time that led to what would become his lifetime commitment to healing as a Christian Science practitioner. Christian Scientists have been in the midst of the human scene for a century and a half. The world might assess that presence as having been fairly quiet. But during that century and a half, great changes in individual and collective thought have been taking place. And Christian Science has had a lot to do with that. The discoverer of Christian Science writes, the beatings of our heart can be heard, but the ceaseless throbbings and throes of thought are unheard as it changes from material to spiritual standpoints. The prayers of practitioners, the spiritually minded work of nurses, our scientific prayers for ourselves and our families are not minor acts. Those throbbings and throes of thought, as consciousness changes its focus from a material to a spiritual one, are the forever coming of Christ that heals. They're the sign of human thought yielding its sway to the allness of mind, to the one infinite mind that is the mind of each of us. In this new time today, we're seeing things more clearly. This is a time of new possibilities. Why now? Why not now? Because they're needed now. A new time brings the expectation of accomplishments we hadn't thought of before. Spiritual healing is the basis of what points the way forward for humanity. That is, healing through spiritual means of all forms of human limitation. This healing and the thought that brings it are greatly needed. By the way, in my search of the testimonies in our periodicals during the past 3 or 4 years, in that search I found abundant evidence of the breadth of 21st century healing power. There were healings of cancer, multiple sclerosis, heart problems, colitis, mononucleosis, burns, a broken back, hemorrhaging, skin disease, vision and hearing problems, and many other physical and mental challenges, as well as relationship and financial challenges. And I'm sure others have seen, as I have, clear evidence of the healing of COVID symptoms. Each of the 8 graduating nurses today made a profound choice that supports Christian Science healing. The purpose you're giving yourselves to is the most important thing in the world, and your part in it is as important as Jesus' own washing of his disciples' feet. in relation to all of us, nurses and non-nurses, Science and Health says that whatever holds human thought in line with unselfed love receives directly the divine power. I'm not forgetting our branch churches as we go forward into this new time. One might look around and say, is it really a sign of progress to see smaller church congregations with fewer members to do the needed work? Well, this is a time of awakening. Taking church for granted has never been very invigorating, but having to fight to preserve church brings out our full strength. It is invigorating. It's also true that the future of our church is not determined by human circumstances, just as it wasn't in the beginning. It has much more to do with being divinely impelled. So our human capacity isn't the measuring rod. Our trust in God, our spiritual commitment, and our love for one another are showing us more of the church that's being brought forward by divine power. Our truly healing church that is unfolding through God's leading. As we were singing the final verse of Mrs. Eddy's hymn, Satisfied, on a recent Sunday morning, I felt an unexpected clarity about church and this new time. The hymn's words were saying, "The centuries break, the earthbound wake, God's glorified." Well, the centuries are breaking. From the beginning, Mary Baker Eddy was convinced that the divine truth being revealed to her was not meant only for a new small denomination. She writes in Science and Health, "Truth's immortal idea is sweeping down the centuries, gathering beneath its wings the sick and sinning." If the world's problems are the result of collective thought, then truth's immortal idea, sweeping down the centuries, is needed more than ever today. Even the glimpsing of universal truth opens up a new way to think and new possibilities waiting for mankind. In the book, Mary Baker Eddy, Christian Healer, published by the Christian Science Publishing Society, there's a quote from Mrs. Eddy that speaks to the power she saw generated by our love for one another. A portion of her quote says, "You must love all. No matter if they persecute you even, you must love all. But you must especially love the brethren." And then she concludes, "This is what the world must see before we can convince the world of the truths of Christian Science." So our love for one another paves the way for the healing and saving mission of Christian Science to reach the world. There's one final point I'd like to conclude with, and this is it. Christian Science isn't waning, it's waxing. You know how the moon is described as waning when it grows darker and darker, and it's described as waxing as it becomes more illuminated, more and more illuminated. Well, Christian Science is waxing. I'm not talking about numbers of followers. I'm talking about the effect of Christian Science on human thinking, including our own. So it's important that we recognize this. Thank you all for giving yourselves to this new time.